Welcome everybody to the last in this first pilot series of our Community Resilience Leadership program. We have many partners that we want to thank for participating and sponsors for making this possible. We're going to continue to connect community resilience leaders of neighborhood sites and hubs tonight. We're going to zoom quickly through the overview since many people have heard this before in our previous 3 sessions. Today is our climate readiness and sustainability session. And a note that these resilience themes apply anywhere, but the stories are from the San Francisco South Bay leaders. We'll begin by honoring the Indigenous stewards of Northern California. Thank them for their stewardship in generations past, present, and future. And may our work tonight help steward this beautiful land that we call home. Nativelands.ca is a great website if you want to learn more about the native stewardship. Take a deep breath as we dive into our climate resilience program for tonight. And again, our favorite resilience definition is bouncing forward into stronger, more prosperous communities after a shock. And resilience is, I call a one-word label for the many different words that people use to describe the kind of places that they want to call home. And resilient regions are the tipping point. And so that's why we're focusing in the South Bay area, because you can connect a lot of neighborhoods and communities working together at a region to be able to influence things at a larger scale, all the way up to the national and global scale. We use a model of resilient places in this program, starting again with the neighborhoods where people can host programs, even if they don't have a shared facility in amongst neighbors or a service group like Rotary or Lions or in their apartment building. Or you can have a site that's organized for generally some other purpose, like a place of worship or a school or a library, and those sites can offer resilience programs. And then finally, the larger scale hubs are what we call first full service hubs that do multi-purpose programs for the public. There's a couple models that are useful for that from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network on a national scale, and California has a model of community resilience centers. Sometimes they're not a single, these bigger sites may not be one single location, they might be a network of a group of collaborative sites. And I will, by the way, be sharing these slides so that you'll be able to click on some of these links and learn more about them. And you can also look at some of these examples of projects and programs that these different types of resilient places host. We've got several speakers tonight. Thank you to Debbie and Cade for joining us. I'll introduce them more in a minute. And like our other programs, we're going to be learning about climate readiness and sustainability, getting to know each other in breakout groups, sharing stories and experiences. And one special thing about tonight, since this is our last session, that we will be harvesting our program feedback and interests that you have for what comes up next. So that's the overview of the program overall. And I'm going to give a quick overview to climate readiness and sustainability, climate resilience. These words kind of refer to similar concepts that have to do with taking care of the earth, the planet, which also means taking care of the people who live on the planet and their systems. I like the definition of climate resilience from Pathways to Resilience, which describes it as climate change mitigation and adaptation and deep democracy. And just to give you some context, you might have heard these words before. Mitigation is stopping climate change and hopefully even reversing it by lowering the greenhouse gas emissions. And there are different ways that climate change can seem like a huge problem that we don't have any influence on. I mean, it's really not true. It's affecting us today where we live right now, and everything that we do individually and on a community level and on a regional level can really have a big impact. And these are some of the ways that the South Bay programs are practicing mitigation. You'll learn more about that tonight. Adaptation is what we call how we adapt our current systems to lower the risks of the changes that happen, you know, higher heat, air quality, wildfires, power outages, sea rise, and changing our economic systems, our production, our building practices, our exchanging trade practices, even waste management. All of those things need adjusting. And then deep democracy is the language that they use for building inclusion and collaboration, the kind of resilience leadership practices that we've been talking about in this class, and especially in the communities that are affected the most by climate change. And one of the principles that is really important is to include people who are affected by decisions in making those decisions because they live with the consequences. And here are ways that we can practice deep democracy, partnerships, collaborating across businesses and governments and nonprofit organizations and neighborhoods. The dignity of ending extreme poverty and hunger so that everyone has the capacity to work together. And there's legal rights of nature that's a movement also that people may not have heard of. Here are there's a lot of groups already active in climate resilience and sustainability in the South Bay. And here are just a few across government, NGOs, business. We'll talk more about some of these tonight, but I wanted to show you that there are a lot of groups across the whole social sector range, including some of the younger-based, faith-based, community-based, and then there's a lot of groups that have education and farm and agriculture practices and programs that are hard at work, taking care of watersheds is another example. There are just too many to put on one page, but just to give you an idea of where to look. And that opens the floor for our first two climate resilience stories for tonight, starting with Debbie Mytels. She's going to be telling the story of Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action, and she's involved in several other organizations as well. Thank you, Debbie, for being here. And I'll introduce Cade when he's up. So Debbie, please take it away. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, can't hear her.
Mute here. There. Okay, now I'm not on mute. And now I got to share my screen. We'll do that. And thank you all for inviting me to come and talk today. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to chat with all of you for the next few minutes. And let me put it so we can see the slideshow there. Okay. So thank you again for inviting me. And I'm going to just give a little brief overview of what I want to talk about. A little bit about my personal faith commitment, and then some about resilience and environmental justice. Whoops, wrong way to go back here. And then the importance of working together. And then a little bit about what Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action does, which is greening our facilities, educating our members and the community that surrounds us, and legislative action. And then just a few further thoughts on collaborative action. So just a little bit about myself. My family background is as a Unitarian Universalist, which was my parents' religious perspective, and I grew up in that. And I married into a Jewish family who survived the Holocaust in Europe. And then my three children, my daughter has also married a Jewish person, and their boys have gone through being bar mitzvahed. And my other two sons, they belong to the Church of Sports and Recreation on Sunday, but they have good values too. So our family were people concerned about racial justice starting back in the 50s, and my parents encouraged us to give our ice cream money to Martin Luther King for some of the work that he was doing in the South, and we did that. And growing up among the orange groves of Southern California, I really developed early on a love for nature and recognized the widening circle of interdependence that people are part of, that, you know, we might start out identifying with our family and then people in our tribe perhaps, or our nation. And then I think since World War II, it's really become a fairly universal understanding that we're all humans, part of this human community on Earth. And then sometime during the 80s, there was a woman named Julia Butterfly Hill who began sitting in a redwood tree up in Northern California that she called Luna. And that sort of symbolizes the awareness that we've had now that all living things are connected and that we are all part of this unified Earth. And some people even go so far as to give some kind of animation or animus life to inanimate objects like rocks and stones. And it's a recognition that we're all part of one together. And then the importance for me of a faith-based perspective on things and recognizing that all life is sacred, that really calls us to put, you know, this faith into action and make a difference when we act in accordance with our values. So that's sort of a little bit about what I've been doing with my 70 plus years. So science tells us that we all live on one Earth, and the faith tells us that we need to become involved. And climate change really is humanity's greatest challenge. We have many other challenges too. We have economic inequality, we have racial disparity and prejudices and lots of other issues, health we need to work on, but climate change is really grabbing us and we have to pay attention. We have to learn to live together on this planet, and it's really urgent. Scientists are telling us we have 10 years, maybe less than 10 years until we reach some inevitable and extreme tipping point. So we really have to start changing the way in which we live. So what should we do? That's one of the big questions a lot of people have. They recognize that climate change is happening. 75% of people are aware of it, but what can I do? So take the issue, for example, of polluted water. You know, remember what happened a few years ago in Flint, Michigan, when the water supply was polluted? Well, some people have said, well, I'll just buy bottled water. But other people say, wait a minute, we need to fix our water supply. And that's some of the challenges, that wealthy people may feel they can buy their way out of these problems, but really equitable policy change really offers a varied support to people based upon their resources and needs. And that we have to think about, how are we going to support those who cannot make changes on their own because they don't have the resources or maybe not the knowledge. So we really have to think about policy choices and things that we can do at that larger societal level. And that really brings us to the importance of working together, because we have to work together. And interfaith organizations, as well as any other collaborative action, really is an effort for people to come together from different traditions who play different roles in the community, recognizing that we all live on Earth, or in the microcosm, we all live in the same community and we have to work together. And this is an urgent need for today, recognizing that climate change is a threat to all humans and certainly is changing all of the life on this planet. And I think it's really important that our faith voices do matter. Not to say that other people coming at things from an ethical perspective are not important as well, but I think people from a faith perspective do tap deeper into human connections and are really able to work on sort of moving past the clutter of daily life to really focus on what's essential to survival and essential really for creating joy, which humans are capable of. So Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action is a monthly networking meeting that's been going on since 2014. And we have participants from about 24 congregations, ranging from geographically from Millbrae up near San Francisco Airport down to Los Gatos and San Jose in the south. And most of the people who participate are leaders in a green team at their congregation. They're working to change their organization. And one of the things that a lot of the groups have done is they've worked first on their facilities. When we started out, only one of these congregations had solar on its roof. And now about half of them do. And others are trying to figure out how they can afford to do it as well. One of the things I'll call to your attention is an organization called Sunwork, which is a nonprofit. Sunwork.org is its website. And they're a nonprofit installer of solar panel systems on both individual residential homes as well as congregations and other for-profit companies. Because they use trainees to do the work, people who are learning how to install solar systems, they're able to do it for a lower rate. And so it's a good opportunity for other organizations to get solar put on their roof. California Interfaith Power and Light, of which PICA is one of the local affiliates, also has a program where they're working with congregations with a small grant that they got, but they're available again, there'll be another granting cycle. And they've set up 2 resilience centers, both at 2 congregations in San Mateo County, Hope United Methodist in South San Francisco, and Temple Peninsula Sinai in Foster City. And they put solar on the roof and big battery storage so that they can be a community resilience hub for the community, not just for their members, but for those in the surrounding neighborhood as well. Other congregations have done things like changed their garden landscaping. First Congregational in Palo Alto, as one example, got rid of a huge lawn area that they had and a bunch of shrubbery, and they've created a beautiful meditation garden where people have native plants and walkways and paths and places to sit down as an individual in a small little meditation site or a larger meeting section that they have. It's really wonderful to see what can be done with native plants. A couple of other congregations I know of have created a plan to electrify. Trinity Episcopal in Menlo Park and the Palo Alto UU Church have taken on to make a real commitment among their members over the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to get rid of all of the gas in their facilities. They're going to get rid of the gas water heaters, the gas heating systems, the gas stoves, and make it be a fossil-free facility. Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which is the electricity purchaser for much of Santa Clara County, as well as San Jose's Climate Smart program, are also providing rebates that are available to individuals, as well as to congregations and other nonprofits that would be available for people who want to get rid of their gas as well. And the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which is called IRA, which is passed already a year ago, and it is going to have their guidelines available coming out this fall, will also allow for congregations that don't pay taxes, of course, because they're tax exempt, but they would be able to get tax exempt credits that would give them funding to the equivalent of what an individual who pays taxes would get. So that's something to look into when those information comes out. So there are funding resources available for everyone who wants to change. Did I skip one? I skipped one. Whoops, now I'm losing everything. Forgive me there. Let's see here. Where is my slideshow gone to? There. Oh, we're already back here. Excuse me for this. Wait a second. Yeah, okay, education. Another big thing that we work on in PICA is to educate the not only members of our community, but also to educate the broader community. Oh, I'm having trouble with the slideshow. Forgive me here. One quick, we'll get through it to the right spot here. Anyone who's interested in having a presentation about climate change science can tap into the Climate Reality Project. The Silicon Valley group has an updated set of Al Gore's famous slides, which was part of his movie An Inconvenient Truth, which talks about the causes of climate change as well as what's happening with up-to-date slides and pictures of things that have happened just this past winter, for example. Another really good presentation that you might want to have for your group is called En-ROADS, which was created by scientists and others at MIT, which talks about solutions that people can work on. For example, if you decide, your community decides they want to get rid of diesel, gasoline school buses and put in electric school buses, how much carbon would you save by doing that? Or if your community decided they wanted to change all of the gas water heaters to electric water heaters, how much carbon would you save by doing that? It's a simulation. You can practice that exercise to figure out what are some of the best and most cost-effective ways to move forward on carbon reduction. Another important thing that we've created, excuse me one second, is that we've created a resource guide for congregations that include practical actions that individuals can take. And we have people who are interested in doing an induction cooking demonstration where you can borrow and have a person come and show you how to do it. Have a cooktop with induction cooking and how to use the iron and steel pans to make something. And you can have little pancakes that we give everybody or something like that. There's electric vehicle expositions that are happening. There's one coming up this weekend, actually, on June 3rd in Los Altos. And then having programs for people about their food and their travel choices and how could they do those things differently and how you could save carbon in that regard. Another important thing that groups can do is they can have conversations. A couple of groups that I know have been having really deeper conversations about what is actually a very scary topic, climate change, because it means we have to change. The First Congregational Church in Palo Alto has spent Sunday afternoons after their service, and they've had from 10 to 15 to 20 people just come together and talk about what are our concerns about climate change? What can we do about it? What are the dangers that we might look into in our neighborhood here? And also, what are the positive things that might come out of it? Another group is called This Is What We Did. And this is a San Jose-based group, which is basically the answer to a grandson who asked his grandfather, what did you do about climate change, granddad? And they've come up with a variety of ideas, particularly also about having conversations, talking with each other. And they have a training that they offer people, a 3-session program where people talk about climate change among themselves, the participants, and then they learn how to have conversations with other people, from people in the grocery store line to at their congregation, at their workplace, having people over in the evening for just a casual conversation about it. It's a really wonderful program, and I can provide you with more information about that. Some of the other groups in PICA have done films and lectures for the community as well as for the members. Our church has been doing one called the Conscientious Projector Series, which is kind of fun. And we've had movies such as Kiss the Earth and other things about ecological food and things like that. Mostly, I think it's important that we should try to find and share good news, because that engenders hope to people. If you hear a story about what's happening about climate change and what people are doing to change their carbon emissions, please share it with others. It's more important to do that than to go through the sort of doom scrolling that gets people get talking about how worse and worse and worse it's getting. We need to engender hope among others to show people there is a way forward. And the scientists and the engineers are showing that there is. If we get to work now and start changing our systems, we can do this. And that's especially important for youth, I think. The last part of the stuff that we do at PICA is legislative action. Al Gore has talked about how important it is to change light bulbs, but you also have to change the laws. And we meet annually with our local assembly member, Mark Berman, and State Senator Josh Becker. And there's coming up in June now, the Interfaith Power and Light's legislative days in Sacramento on June 21st, and we'll be going to meet with state assembly people. And some of the bills that they'll be supporting involve divestment of California's pension funds from fossil fuels, bi-directional charging to be required in all electrical vehicles by 2027, and a bill to electrify school buses, which I think is really important. I used to ride a smelly diesel bus to school when I was a kid. Also, we encourage people to engage in grassroots lobbying, and a number of congregations have been doing this. The way easy you can do it, you can write out a letter, say, in support of electric school buses, why we think it's important that kids shouldn't have to breathe diesel fuels when they're waiting for the bus or when they're riding on it. You write a letter and you say, I support AB 757. And then you make about 25, 30 copies, depending upon how many you think can get signed. Pass it around on a clipboard during coffee hour, or head up a table afterwards, after your weekend services, and use this pre-written copied letter. Get people to write a wet signature, give them a pen, and then say, just make one sentence comment about why you think this is important. And you'd say, it's really important that my kid breathe clean air when she rides her bus to school. And then you put it together, put it in an envelope. You can mail it, but you can save postage also. We collect them most of the time, and we put them into a big envelope, and we hand deliver it before the next week is passed over to the local offices of our assembly people. So it's an interesting way to get them to see where we are. And 2 Sundays ago, we collected 44 letters to give to local Congress people and local assembly members about the federal debt reduction bill. Last thing I'll mention is working to engage voters. And our group has been working with the Center for Common Ground, which works on national elections in various states around, but particularly in states where there are a lot of underrepresented voters, in states where there's voter suppression, particularly among people of color in states in the South. And we've mailed postcards. We've done thousands of postcards actually through local participation in the Center for Common Ground, which is a nonpartisan group. And they remind voters about voter registration deadline and the polling rules in their state. And it doesn't talk about Republicans or Democrats, it's nonpartisan, but it's a way to talk about engaging people. And I have one more slide, which is just a quick look into creating a resilient community vision. I was at a webinar earlier this week about a group called Pando Populus. And Pando is a large, multi-acre, thousands of acre tree or plant that grows in southern Utah that has hundreds of tree trunks. And it is a single organism with all related roots all together. And they've taken that as the name of this collaborative project in Los Angeles County. And there is a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer Network task force that's been created among the 80 cities in Los Angeles County, and they're all working together to create a way that they can all work together to create the plan that has been approved by the County Board of Supervisors. And what they've done in the past 6 months is they created Pando Days, which were projects at 11 colleges throughout LA County, from USC to El Camino Community College, where 11 colleges had their students work on different projects that they took a whole semester to work on to help bring about some change in relationship to the issues of sustainability within their community. And locally, we have the same opportunity with Santa Clara County's Climate Collaborative, which includes people from government, NGOs, and educators. And they're creating teams right now to work on sea level rise, health impacts of heat, fire, and smoke issues. And Leslie's going to tell you more about that later as we go on. So I'll just stop here, and after I lose my slide again, I wanted to give you my email address and encourage you to write to me if I can get my thing to work. Back. Well, I'm losing it. I'll just stop. My email is debbie.mytels@gmail.org. And I look forward to hearing from you all further. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Debbie. And your email is actually on the slides when I send it out. So
okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, everybody will have it.
So next I'll introduce Cade Cannedy from Climate Resilient Communities to share his story about their work in climate justice. Take it away, Cade.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, Debbie, for starting us off tonight. Share my screen real quickly here. And thank you for the introduction. Like Leslie was saying, my name is Cade Cannedy, and I am, 1 second, can't do both at once. My name is Cade Cannedy. I'm the Resilient Adaptation Program Manager with Climate Resilient Communities. I'm also shortly going to be the Director of Programs there. But I would consider myself, like, first and foremost, a community organizer. And Climate Resilient Communities is a community-based organization, a nonprofit in San Mateo County. We work to empower community voices to implement equitable climate solutions to bring about unity, resilience, and justice. And I wanted to start today by talking a little bit about my own personal story and like what drew me into this work. Telling you all a little bit about that. So originally I grew up in northern New Mexico outside of a town called Taos. It's a town of about 1,500 people or so. Some people know Taos, which is about 25 or 30 minutes away. And I grew up there and had, kind of a rural upbringing. But one of the things that always loomed pretty largely in the town, in everyone's kind of consciousness, was just the nearby molybdenum mine. And molybdenum is a metal that's used a lot in airplane manufacturing and is also used somewhat ironically in electric vehicles. But this mine in particular was owned by Chevron, previously owned by Molycorp. And it was about 5 or 10 miles upstream of where I grew up. And the mine had a really long history of polluting the nearby community, but at the same time, it was the town's largest employer, the single largest employer in the county, actually. And that put the entire town in like a pretty hard bind, wherein the thing that's sort of giving you your life, giving you subsistence, putting bread on your table, is also kind of slowly taking it off the table with the same hand, right? It's killing you slowly, but in exchange for getting you to the next day. When the mine finally closed in 2014, I remember my best friend's dad worked at the mine, and all 600 of the employees were laid off. And that was not really something that came about as anything that the community did. It was more a function of profit and loss. The community had been working in some ways for a really long time to try and get the mine closed down, but it was always a really hotly contested topic because so many people depended on it at the same time. Here's a little map. So here's Taos down here. Here's Cuesta, and then I was right about here, halfway between the two. And in the end, it's going to cost about $1 billion to clean up the mine. Chevron is paying for about 150 million of that cleanup process. So in the end, it's still the state that's really been stuck with it. And I think the reason ultimately that the community wasn't able to effectively organize, really to close down the mine of their own volition or to stop it being implemented there in the first place, is just that the community had no political power. We didn't have any strong relationships or ties to one another. There wasn't any way that we were, coordinated around this particular issue. And the mine itself, did a good job of kind of keeping people separated between those that it was paying to be there and those that wanted it closed for other reasons. So that's sort of a lesson that kind of leads me into the work that I'm doing now, and kind of really drove home the point to me that climate resilience and climate justice or environmental justice are very much the same thing. I know that's kind of a topic that Debbie mentioned too, was climate justice, but I wanted to kind of talk about what exactly that means. Right here in the peninsula, these are kind of the communities that we work in. We work in North Fair Oaks, Bellhaven, and East Palo Alto right now. We're also hoping to expand into other communities that could use our help. But you can see sort of the visual difference from above in the tree canopy cover just between East Palo Alto here at the bottom and Palo Alto at the top, Menlo Park in the middle. So it's a very visual example of that kind of environmental imbalance that is a result of sort of long-standing systemic institutions like redlining practices that were regularly employed in both East Palo Alto and in Menlo Park throughout the early 1900s, all the way up until 1970s even. And the legacy of those practices and also the racialized aspects of where polluting activity gets located. For example, in New Mexico, right, the polluting activity was not going to be located in, the most well-paying, most populated place they could find, right? It's going to be located in the place where the people are poor enough to welcome the polluting activity with open arms, right? They ask for it willingly, and that's a systemic issue, something that is baked into the way that we structure society and distribute both the benefits and burdens of our economic system of production. So there's a lot of different approaches for achieving environmental justice, reducing pollution exposure at the source, improving healthy food access. All of these things here are ways that you can kind of get at resolving some of those injustices. But the US EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. But I like to talk about it in a bit of a different way. I like to say that environmental justice is distributional, procedural, and substantive. By distributional, I mean it's about how we are sharing amongst us the benefits and burdens, like I said, associated with all of our economic activity, right? Who gets access to the park, who gets to live near the wild open spaces, and who has to live near the factory or near the giant mine. It's also procedural, right? It's about the reason that folks weren't able or are living near these major sources of pollution is because they weren't able to be involved in a meaningful way in the political processes that ultimately oversaw either that zoning practice or whatever it may be. So once we realize that we are not all sharing the environment in equitable ways, and that it's the result of people being prevented from political participation, then it becomes incumbent upon us, as Debbie was mentioning with her background in the faith community, to act, right? That's a moral calling once you recognize that things are not equally distributed, and it's specifically because people have been prevented access to the political levers and sources of power that would bring about those fair outcomes. It calls on all of us to start to act in different ways to transform those systems and make more substantive changes at the systematic level, right? It's not just about whether you as an individual can purchase an EV. It's about making sure that the system that privileges some folks and moves them away from pollution and harms others is subverted or is transformed to more equally distribute those outcomes. And that's something that takes place across all layers of societal organization, right? It happens between East Palo Alto and Palo Alto, but it also happens between the United States of America and countries in South America, for example, or China, where we export a lot of our polluting activity to do. So environmental justice is thinking in those terms, in the distributional terms, in the procedural terms, the political terms, and in what that calls on us all to act. Here is another sort of visual indicator of that distribution of environmental burdens, right? Here is West Menlo Park and Bellhaven, which is the formerly redlined community in Menlo Park. And you can see here, just based on the CalEnviroscreen scores, that this is sort of a legacy associated with racialized zoning practices and redlining practices. It's same thing here. I'm sorry, this is a little blurry, but it's showing the same thing in East Palo Alto. Similarly here, lead risk is, another environmental hazard associated with both those phenomena. Some more statistics here, just showing the disparity across a bunch of different aspects between Bellhaven and the rest of Menlo Park. So you can see how this stuff that might be history is still having a really prevalent impact. And then I just wanted to talk briefly about the work that CRC is doing. We organize folks across like all different levels, right? We help with the individual, people who are understanding and figuring out how to adapt and what they can do to bring about environmental justice in their community. We do that primarily through educational workshops, interventions like that. We also work at the household level by helping folks retrofit their homes for climate resilience and safety improvements. And then we work at the regional level to help organize communities to help start pulling on those levers of power at a more systematic level to make those larger changes that's necessary to bring about and realize environmental justice. So I just have here some photos from the different programs. And I think in the second half, I'm going to talk a little bit about a more specific case study where we worked with communities and residents in East Palo Alto to win a grant to install rain gardens, which are a great nature-based solution to different climate change hazards like flooding, but also give folks a really tangible way of preventing displacement in their community, which is something that was top of mind for residents in East Palo Alto. So thank you all for allowing me to talk today. And I can also touch on this program a little bit, which was a great great project that we led with an interfaith coalition, ultimately a community-led effort to raise money through the churches and through a lot of our great partners in the faith community to buy and distribute air purifiers in East Palo Alto, Belhaven, and North Fair Oaks. So I'm excited to talk about both of those a little later on.
Thank you so much, Cade. That was wonderful. And so we've had great stories now from a faith-based organization perspective and a community-based organization perspective and how they work together. And that's a goal of a leadership program like this, so we can work together to form resilient places from different perspectives. So let me share my screen again to move us into our first breakouts. One second. I want that to go away. All right. So thank you, Susan, for organizing us to go into our first breakouts, organized as we usually do. People who want to talk at the neighborhood level, at the site level, or a hub center level to explore climate readiness.
Great. So yeah, we have 3 rooms and you just have to.
Welcome back from the breakout rooms. Hope you had interesting discussions. Sure you did. And we're going to invite Cade back up to the storyteller's podium here to talk about the rain garden project he mentioned before.
Awesome. And could you remind me the timing on this one?
Yeah, 8, 10 minutes, whatever you need.
All right. Sounds good. So I want to start by taking you all back to New Year's Eve, which was a very hectic time for me because I was back home in New Mexico with my parents, and I started just getting a bunch of calls from residents asking me where they could get sandbags. And I just remember feeling like extremely helpless, being so far away from folks who needed my help, and just jumping on the phone, retreating into my room, jumping on the phone and started calling anyone I could think of who would know where sandbags were, finding ways to connect residents to those people, tell them how to get there, connect residents to each other. And I think it just really drove home how much disaster preparedness is an environmental justice issue, and how much our community resilience in times of disasters, the ability to bounce forward, as Leslie mentioned, is really dependent on our connections to one another, and on our like strong, societal bonds. So one of the things that CRC is working on is a project to install rain garden and water cistern systems in East Palo Alto. We received a grant to install about 25 of them at private homes. And the way this whole process came about was basically from the ground up. So starting in like 2019, we started by just bringing folks together around the issue of climate change. Residents, people who are particularly passionate about climate change like you all, and different nonprofit leaders, folks who are just present in their community, people in the faith community, pastors from a couple different churches, and bringing those folks together, they really served as a vehicle for kind of forming and expressing community priorities around climate change. And a lot of the folks there who were present in that conversation remembered in 1998 when there was a big flood event that went through East Palo Alto, caused about $40 million in damage, and permanently displaced a few families from the community. And that was something that really weighed heavy on people, even 20 years after the fact. And that's when we started our work to try and find solutions to the flooding issue that also helped help keep people in the community. And we went through a bunch of different activities with this group, building their capacity, their understanding around climate change. and it manifested in this project to install rain gardens. And the reason why we ended up going with rain gardens and why the community preferred that particular process is that they saw it as an opportunity for a lot of spillover benefits, right? It was a way that we could develop a workforce within the community. We could train people on how to install these types of like nature-based solutions to climate change. And they were a way to help keep people in their homes. One of the quirks around floodplains and how they're managed is that if you own a home and you have a mortgage on that home and you're in a floodplain, you're required to purchase insurance. But if you've paid off your house, if you've been in the community for 60 years, you can choose to just shoulder that risk and forego the flood insurance. So if someone were to suffer a pretty catastrophic flooding experience, that's something that could, really permanently displace them. Even sort of smaller issues, like say around drainage, you have a lot of water pooling next to one of the walls of your house, and it's been doing that for 10 years. The entire wall can be rotted, and that'll be a $50,000 or $80,000 bill to have replaced. And so those kind of issues can be addressed in ways that offer a bunch of when you look at problems through an intersectional lens, you can find solutions that also address all of those concerns. It also is an opportunity for folks to have a drought-tolerant garden, to have a garden that they can grow edible species in, and build in like food sovereignty. Also, it helps folks reduce their water bill. So it's a solution with a lot of benefits, and it's tangible and immediate for a community that needs solutions. A little bit about the project is that we've started recruiting ambassadors. We have our first 5 garden ambassadors selected already. They're going to be paid about $5,000 over the 6-month period to learn how to install and maintain these gardens. And we're going to recruit another 5 next year. We're hoping to have 10 installations at private residences by the end of this year as well, and 15 more by next fall. And then the last piece of that is kind of putting it all together in a paper and circulating it. That way we can make the argument to different funders that this is a solution that's worthwhile, that's worth their money. And one other part of the project is doing a lot of technical modeling so we can figure out how effective these solutions are at reducing flooding and at what scale they need to be implemented in order for the cost-benefit analysis to tip in favor of this type of dispersed multi-benefit solution to a climate hazard. I think that this lesson or the discussion around the rain gardens and how we arrived at them through a community-driven process is one that's illustrative of a couple different things. And the first is that when you are thinking about climate change, it's really about, and resilience generally, and the ability to bounce forward. It starts with strong relationships in your community. It starts with kind of fighting the atomization that's really inherent in our society and is partially, again, a result of the system of economic production that we have that forces low-income people, for example, to work 2 jobs. When are you going to have time to talk to your neighbors when you can't even have time to talk to your kids? So trying to fight against that urge or that pressure to atomize people in society and divorce them from one another, building deep connection through our churches, I think, is an excellent place where this kind of activity can occur. And it's really vital that those places keep reaching out, keep expanding their network, keep bringing people in. But I want to also talk about the tangible aspect of the project is really something that helps bring people together, right? When you are in a community that has been, marginalized for a really long time, that has been systematically discriminated against, it's really easy and rational to feel that your participation in these sort of political processes is not worth your time because it hasn't been in the past. And showing folks that their actions together in their community with one another can produce real tangible changes that they can see and feel and touch, and that keeps people in their community, is something that fights that atomization, that gets people involved and interested in the process. And so I think that also kind of helps you think about your own role in that position, right? Of thinking about the ways that your actions affect your community. For example, if you want to cut down your tree, well, in what sense is it your tree for a moment, right? If everybody in the community depends on it to lower the temperature of the community, or to sequester carbon, or to shade the community, right? That's something you really need to weigh seriously when you're making that sort of decision. Same thing when it comes to like whether you have a rain garden or something like that. That's a community asset. Like these things, whether they're on your property or not, are still providing benefits to the community and are connecting you to your neighbors in ways you may not initially be aware of. I think the last thing is just that the other important note is about like where and where you can make real changes is also like where you keep your money, where you keep your personal investments is a really significant power that you have. A lot of the large banks and financial institutions that we use bankroll a lot of the projects that are killing us, slowly but surely, and that are disproportionately harming communities like the one I grew up in. And moving your money to a community bank, to a credit union, is something that really can go a long way and is actually one of the most powerful tools at your disposal as an individual. And again, you can reframe that individualistic understanding of what can you do about climate change to what can you do that benefits your community and has spillover effects for the climate. By keeping your money in a community bank, in a local institution, you're keeping that money local, you're supporting businesses that are local to your community, and that itself is an act of defiance in the face of the larger institutions that are bringing about the climate crisis. And so if I could leave you with just one lesson that came out of my work with the rain gardens in East Palo Alto, is just that we have to look for ways to fight atomization and alienation from one another wherever we can. And if we can do that through tangible projects that benefit the climate, then that's a win-win for everyone, right? But if it's a bowling league that you set up, that's a great start. I think bringing people together is the first step in making these real systemic changes to institutions and the problem of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Cade. Oh, that's a lot of valuable experience, tangible experience at what people can do themselves and at a local community level. So thanks very much for that perspective. I'm going to share a brief story about what's happening at the county level, at a regional level, because again, we can think of climate change as something that's happening far away, and also not really having the big picture perspective about climate change in our region and sustainability in our region. So I wanted to share a brief story about the Santa Clara County Climate Collaborative that just launched officially a couple of weeks ago, and several of us were there. The Silicon Valley Interreligious Council, that's one of the lead partner and sponsor for this program. We have joined the Climate Collaborative, and I encourage you to take a look at their website and consider having your organization join if you're interested. They're planning that this be a big county-wide networking organization, has many groups that have been involved already. So this is the place to be if you want to be informed about what's going on in climate resilience. They've got tools. They're going to have working groups. I think see, where's the list of the current working groups? There's one on heat and air quality. There's one on urban forestry, and there's one on sea level rise. So you can explore this website yourself. And here's another tool that I find really useful. It's a climate change preparedness tool that can give you a lot of information about the different aspects of climate change, and even lets you look at different areas in the county and do projections about what the impact is in that area. So here's maps of wildfire risk. And they look at riverine flooding, sea level rise, wildfire, and extreme heat. So this gives you the bigger picture perspective of the problems that we're facing in our region over the next decades, and hopefully inspires us to realize that, yeah, it's important to be able to figure out how to, in our own yards and in our neighborhoods, keep the tree cover and address flooding issues, and have our school or our church or our business be able to be a cooling center or a heating center or a disaster center for people to evacuate to after a wildfire. Even be able to provide power if you have a backup generator for people in your neighborhood when the power goes out. We need many different places like that around the whole area. So start thinking about what is, just echoing what Cade said, think about what you can do that supports the community. And this is some of the information that may help you understand how critical that is.